Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We have reached episode number 53, and we are going through the first part of the Synthesis of Yoga, the Yoga of Divine Works, in which we are on the third chapter, paragraph number 11. And those who are new, you will find link to this chapter in the description. I will highly recommend that you follow the text so that we can immerse in it together and enjoy learning Sri Aurobindo's major work, the Synthesis of Yoga. In the last episode, we got a bird's eye view of the method and principle of the Gita. Two key powers. One is the power of equality, the other is the power of oneness. Both are powers as well as states of consciousness. These provides in its union the entire process of Karma Yoga as it is laid out in the Gita, where it starts with renunciation of personal desire as a motive for action and surrendering to the divine, who brings this profound, deep, inner, calm, stillness, silence, passivity, opening to the possibility of equality in all action. And that would gradually dissolve the ego. And when the ego dissolves, we enter into the other dimension of experience, which is oneness with the larger multiplicity. And Sri Aurobindo also insists it is not just the passive side of oneness, but an active dynamic force of oneness that is holding everything together. It will enable us to engage and realize all this amidst work and opening to the full energy of nature flowing through us, and to do the largest possible action through a well-prepared instrument. Now with that, let's now dive deeper. Paragraph number 11. All things here are the one and indivisible, eternal, transcendent, and cosmic Brahman. All things here are the entire manifestation that is here, that we experience through our five senses. All the animate and inanimate, entire thing. It's not just that which is beyond and transcendent, but all things here. It's a very important point. All things here are the one and indivisible, eternal, transcendent, and cosmic Brahman. Transcendent and cosmic, the two aspects. One is transcending the time and space and manifestation. Other is the entire cosmic existence, all the way down to its material existence. And it is indivisible. Only in our cognitive, our human experience, it appears as separate. So all things here are the one and indivisible, eternal, transcendent, and cosmic Brahman. The word Brahman became a core word during the Upanishadic period. And the Gita comes after that. He is using that Upanishadic phrase, that one thing that is the foundation, the source of the entire existence, the Brahman, the Absolute. That is, in its seeming, divided in things and creatures. In seeming only, for in truth it is always one and equal. in all things and creatures, and the division is only a phenomenon of the surface. So there is an equal presence of this absolute Brahman, Samam Brahman, whether it is a tiny grain of sand or all the way to the whole earth or the entire solar system, it is exactly the same absolute one existence. But our individual experience says this is small grain of sand, this is much bigger earth, and the galaxy is the large, huge, unimaginably vast thing. Therefore, it is great, whereas this tiny grain of sand is insignificant. But from the point of view of that indivisible Brahman, indivisible consciousness, which is the source of all things, there is a fundamental equality across all the scales, no matter what the scale is, what the size is. So all things here are the one and indivisible, eternal, transcendent, and cosmic Brahman. That is, in its seeming divided in things and creatures, in seeming only. For in truth, it is always one and equal in all things and creatures, whether it is animate, inanimate, in all things and creatures. And the division is only a phenomenon of the surface. So imagine we human beings have created such an inequality because psychologically we are so divided, we cannot see the fundamental equality of the entire existence. Even among people, we have created all our hierarchies, separations, low and high. These are the categorizations brought in by our divided small little ego and limitations of our cognitive instrument. And it is only a superficial surface reality. The division is only a phenomenon of the surface. As long as we live in the ignorant seeming, we are the ego and are subject to the modes of nature, enslaved to appearances. As long as we live in the ignorant seeming, we are seemingly ignorant. Our mind is limited and narrow in its possibilities, its understanding. But even that is a surface formation. As long as we live in the ignorant seeming, we are the ego and are subject to the modes of nature. Keep that phrase in mind, modes of nature. Sri Aurobindo will be coming to it again and again, elaborating on it. The modes of nature. Ego subjected to the modes of nature. So when we are in that ignorance, on the surface, superficial layer of our being, it is an apparent ignorance. As long as we live in the ignorant seeming, we are the ego and are subject to the modes of nature, enslaved to appearances. We are enslaved to the appearances. Things appear through our sensory experience as this divided, separate existences in conflict or in harmony. So whole life, the way we experience it is only on the surface. Appearances, this is what we can know. Even when we cut through the material reality, divide an organism into its constituent parts, we are still scratching the surface. All the way, even to the molecules, to the atoms, it is still the material crust of things. bound to the dualities, tossed between good and evil, sin and virtue, grief and joy, pain and pleasure, good fortune and ill fortune, success and failure. All these are the dualities in which we are caught, and these are the superficial appearances in which we are caught and tossed between good and evil, sin and virtue, grief and joy, pain and pleasure, good fortune and ill fortune, success and failure. And this is where we lose our balance, our equality, because we are bound by dualities and the modes of nature. We follow helplessly the iron or guilt and iron round of the wheel of Maya. Maya with capital M. Maya, this material manifest world, is referred to as the Maya. Maya doesn't really mean illusion. It is a limiting of the infinity. Infinity limits itself into finite appearances, bound infinite in a finite form. So, enslaved to appearances, bound to the dualities, tossed between good and evil, sin and virtue, grief and joy, pain and pleasure, good fortune and ill fortune, success and failure. We follow helplessly the iron or guilt and iron round of the wheel of Maya. There is a wheel of Maya in which we are caught. Even literally, structurally, there is this wheel of Maya. Day and night, the spinning of the earth, day and night, earth going around the sun with years, seasons. There is this whole cyclic wheel of Maya in which we are caught. And within that, we experience the entire dualities and the modes of nature in which we are helplessly tied. And that is where the imprisonment is. And this is something we are subjected to when we are in this material nature. Even when at the level of the deepest source, we are free spiritual beings, we do not have access to it because we live on the surface personality, bound to the appearances, caught by the dualities, and driven by the modes of nature. At best, we have only the poor relative freedom, which by us is ignorantly called free will. We do have this persistent experience, an illusory experience that I have free will. I can do whatsoever I want. I can live spontaneously, going with the flow, and I'm a free bird. That's a fantastic illusion. And this illusion crashes when you attempt to change the habits of your daily living. Try to introduce a whole new set of habits. You will find that old habits will drive down you on the path of the groove of the past. It's really hard to change the habits. If you set your goals and try to accomplish the goals, you will see how hard it is. There is this stream, force of nature that is working through us. We cannot stop the grip of hunger. We cannot stop the drive of desires. We are compelled by nature's forces, biological drives, psychological drives. We're impelled, and yet we do have a sense of freedom because we can think on our own, we can conceive some goals. Therefore, we have this sense of relative freedom and something we ignorantly call free will. So at best, we have only the poor relative freedom, which by us is ignorantly called free will. Yes, we do have certain free will. When we have a buffet, we can choose this or that out of it. But we cannot say, I will stop eating now onwards. We must eat, but within that, we have some relative freedom of choosing what we want to eat. There again, you can choose healthy food, unhealthy food, driven by desire or driven by a conscious understanding. There is degrees of freedom. But the more you become conscious, you can claim a greater degree of freedom. At best, we have only the poor relative freedom, which by us is ignorantly called free will. But that is at bottom illusory, since it is the modes of nature that expresses themselves through our personal will. It is force of nature grasping us, ungrasped by us, that determines what we shall will and how we shall will it. Nature's forces are grasping us, and it is not grasped by us. There is a difference here. It is nature's force that grasps. And we can see that in animals, for example, among the dogs, when you know that when it is the mating season, I'm referring to largely the wild dogs. When it is mating season, they are in heat. And it is that nature's force that grips them during that period, and they are compelled to mate. It is nature that grips, nature's forces, not just a tiny little individual, but whole species gets gripped. But we are not grasping how the nature is grasping us. We feel that I am the one who is willing. There is a desire that is driving, an ambition that is driving, an accomplishment that is calling me. I want to accomplish this or that. And we do feel that I am the one who has chosen this particular goal for my life. And it's a wonderful feeling that I am independently choosing this goal. And we strive and struggle to acquire that freedom, especially when other people are trying to impose their will on you. You struggle against it to push your will. I want to live the way I want. But what we do not sufficiently recognize is that even the so-called I want, this is my need, that is a propulsion from the nature. Nature acts through us, through the individuals, and individuals become the instruments through which the nature does her work. Remember, key phrase of the synthesis is all life is yoga. And it is yoga of nature that is unfolding, and we become conscious at one point. But when we become conscious, we do come into this illusion that I have the free will to choose my goals, my ambitions, and accomplish them, and I am the one who is driving. These are all the illusions of the ego. It does give a sense of free will. But that is at bottom illusory, since it is the modes of nature that expresses themselves through our personal will. We experience a personal will, but it is the modes of nature that is flowing through us. It is force of nature grasping us, ungrasped by us, that determines what we shall will and how we shall will it. And nature can grasp masses, even a civilization, and push it forward into new heights. When nature's force withdraw, that civilization collapse. It is nature that drives, of which individuals become the instrumental channels through which nature accomplishes her goal in the collective. Nature, not an independent ego, chooses what object we shall seek, whether by reasoned will or unreflecting impulse at any moment of our existence. These are two ways we operate. One is unreflecting impulse, driven by impulse, which we often mistake for I am living freely, spontaneously, going with the flow, which is essentially an unreflecting, impulsion driven life. When you awaken a bit more and develop rational intelligence, then you can bring in a reasoned will to make decisions that analyzes consequences of your action, or get guided by principles that you would like to follow, the principles of ethics, professional ethics, codes of conduct. It is still that will that we are using rational intelligence. And there we do feel I am much more free and I'm choosing this. But in fact, even that is an illusion of the ego. It is nature that is making these things, these choices, whether it is through rational intelligence and its choice or unreflective impulsions. It is still the nature using the ego as its vehicle. Nature, not an independent ego, chooses what object we shall seek, whether by reasoned will or unreflecting impulse, at any moment of our existence. At any moment. When it is time to sleep, nature's mode of tamas will come and grip and drag you down into sleep. And you think that you decided to sleep. And nature herself will wake you up. Your conscious mind is brought back, and you wake up in the morning and you believe that you woke up. It was your choice. Then you choose to eat this or that. And you believe that I made that choice. Everything is driven by nature and modes of nature. Nature is executing her will through us, but the ego experiences it as my choice, my will, my life, my independent, separate existence. These are fantastic illusions of the ego. If, on the contrary, we live in the unifying reality of the Brahman, then we go beyond the ego and overstep nature. Overstepping nature. On one hand, there is a unifying reality of Brahman, or the divine reality of oneness, both static and dynamic. That's a divine reality. It even transcends nature. Remember, in early introductory chapters, Sri Aurobindo brought three consenting parties of yoga. One is the individual, whom nature has created over long periods of evolution. Now this individual is ready, wakes up, and is consciously choosing to practice yoga. The other is this individual is existing in the nature, the vaster nature of which the individual is a part. Because nature had been forging the individual. It is nature willing through the individual, pushing the individual to go beyond. But individual, if the individual is to transcend nature, overstep nature, this individual has to open to that unifying reality of Brahman, which transcends nature, the transcendent existence of the divine. That is what can override even the nature's own conditioned, limited workings and push nature herself to a new possibility. And this is possible for an individual whom nature herself has created as a vehicle for her evolution. That's she even allows this individual to overstep nature. Very important step here. So these three consenting parties, the individual, the nature, and the transcendent divine, they are consenting and working together. So the individual has the possibility of opening to the transcendent divine and bring that into nature. Why? When the individual opens to the transcendent, you are overstepping nature. So let me read this line. If, on the contrary, we live in the unifying reality of the Brahman, our normal life is not in the unifying reality of Brahman or the divine. Our life is narrow, ego-bound surface appearances. If we are able to discard it, open up the windows and doors of our perception, and then if we can enter into that reality, the unifying reality of the Brahman, then we go beyond the ego and overstep nature. That's where the liberation and the freedom come into the picture. We overstep nature. For then we get back to our true self and become the spirit. In the spirit, we are above the impulsions of nature, superior to her modes and forces. So this is the freedom that comes. So here, one thing we need to remember is various schools of yoga found the way to break out of the shell of the ego and overstep nature and merge with the formless unity consciousness, unifying reality. From there, when you look back at nature, the entire creation looks an illusion. But it is only one perspective when seen from the static realization of the divine consciousness. There is a dynamic side, the divine Shakti who is creating the worlds. Only when we open to the dynamic force, there the multiplicity reveals its function. The manifest world, the nature reveals her function as the visible body of the divine, where evolution is unfolding. Realizing only the formless static self is insufficient. There is a dynamic side of the self that alone enables us to see the function and the purpose of creation. Otherwise, the entire purpose of creation gets reduced into an illusion, a maya from which one should get out, which logically doesn't make sense because the Supreme Self did not create this whole world in order to get out of it. It's not reasonable, right? So then we get back to our true self and become the spirit. In the spirit, we are above the impulsion of nature, superior to her modes and forces. So there is this poise of the spirit where you are superior to the modes of nature and her forces, her impulsions. You can look at nature and choose whether this impulsion you want to follow, this mode you want to accept or reject. There is the lordship that comes with mastery over the forces of nature. Attaining to a perfect equality in the soul, mind, and heart. Perfect equality in the soul, mind, and heart. Our mind normally doesn't have that sense of equality. It is categorizing, putting things into hierarchies, and reacting to this or that. Heart, with its emotions, with liking and disliking, it doesn't have the experience of equality. But we can arrive at that equality when we overstep nature. Attaining to perfect equality in the soul, mind, and heart, we realize our true self of oneness. It is from that unifying self we can experience the oneness, which is very different from an emotional, empathic connection with people who are near and dear to you, animals and birds and nature who are near and dear to you. Yes, that's a good taste, but it is still ego centered, bound, small sense of empathy, emotional empathy, ignorance bound, superficial, surface experience. What is being brought in by this larger sense of oneness is equal to all. It has nothing to do with I, me, and myself and my regular contacts and friends and circles and family. No, it is universal in its oneness. It is not an emotional, empathic connection, but a spiritual oneness, something fundamentally different. So then we get back to our true self and become the spirit. In the spirit, we are above the impulsion of nature, superior to her modes and forces. Attaining to perfect equality in the soul, mind, and heart, we realize our true self of oneness. One with all beings, one too with that which expresses itself in them. And in all that we see and experience. So these are all the flavors of that, aspects of that self of oneness. One with all beings. Then one too with that which expresses itself in them. Because all beings at its source is that one being. So you are one with that one being which is expressing through this whole multiplicity. So we become one with the multiplicity and that original one being who is expressing through the multiplicity. And in all that we see and experience, our entire experience of this material existence, in that we experience this oneness. This equality and this oneness are indispensable twin foundation we must lay down for a divine being, a divine consciousness, a divine action. So divine being, divine consciousness, a divine action. If a divine action is to happen, we need that divine consciousness, and behind that, the divine being. And for that, there is this twin foundation of equality and oneness. This is right at the heart of Gita. Gita is not proposing any tools and techniques. It's a psycho-spiritual method, opening to that deep oneness through equality, by renouncing desire, by dissolving the ego, entering into that experience. So this equality, this oneness are indispensable twin foundation we must lay down for a divine being, a divine consciousness, a divine action. Not one with all. We are not spiritual, not divine. If we are not one with all, there is no question of a spiritual life. So, not one with all, we are not spiritual, not divine. Because the very nature of divine consciousness, divine being, is this oneness and equality. If this is not there, there is no question of a spiritual life. We are aspirants on the path. We are aspiring to dissolve our ego, renounce our desire, and experience equality, experience oneness. Until that arrive, this experience of equality and oneness, which is of the divine nature, we are not spiritual. Not equal souled to all things happening and creatures, we cannot see spiritually, cannot know divinely, cannot feel divinely towards others. So having that equal souled poise to all things, all happenings, all creatures, unless we are equal souled, there is no way. We cannot see spiritually. The vision itself will be a limited, bound sense of separation. We cannot see spiritually. Seeing spiritually means seeing in that poise of equality and oneness. And cannot know divinely. Knowing divinely is knowing in oneness. Cannot feel divinely towards others. To have that feeling, how do we feel towards others if we do not have that sense of oneness? If you're coming from the ego, it is starting from the fragmented, isolated, reactive modes of nature. It won't do. So, not equal soul to all things, happening and creatures. We cannot see spiritually, cannot know divinely, cannot feel divinely towards others. The supreme power, the one eternal and infinite, is equal to all things and to all beings. And because it is equal, it can act with an absolute wisdom according to the truth of its works and its force, and according to the truth of each thing and of each creature. It is because it is equal to all things. So what it can do, it can act with an absolute wisdom. Now this wisdom is according to the truth of its works and its force. Like each one has their own innate nature. So according to the truth of each thing and of every creature. We know that we ourselves are so unique. We have our unique fingerprint. Each individual is different. According to the difference of the individual, this universal being acts because it is one with everything. And its action is customized to that particular individual's requirement, particular possibility. And it knows every other things that is surrounding this particular individual and knows each of them individually, the needs and possibilities of each existence, and pushes them all simultaneously according to the possibility of that particular individual, that unique movement. The supreme power, the one eternal and infinite, is equal to all things and in all beings. And because it is equal, it can act with an absolute wisdom, according to the truth of its works and its force, and according to the truth of each thing and of every creature. On one side, there is the truth of the divine being. On the other side, there is the truth of the individualized finite existence. These two truths work together in harmony. And that's the secret we are given through the Gita. This is also the only true freedom possible to man. He's very categorical here. The only true freedom. We individuals seek freedom. We do not want to be dominated by this or that person, this or that community. We seek freedom. And all our conflicts in the world are because each one is fundamentally seeking freedom, liberation from bondage. But all our attempts to get to freedom is leading to more and more conflicts and entanglements because we are operating from the ego and desire and bound by the modes of nature and propelled by her energies. Made complicated by our ego and its limited intelligence, self-centered. That causes all the frictions and conflicts. And you find yourself increasingly entangled, experiencing less and less freedom. We see children, innocent children, they have tremendous freedom. But as we grow up, we get bound more and more. Children, even when they are driven by nature's modes, they are happily surrendered to nature's hands and molding movements. They are unconscious, but free beings. But as we grow, the mind develops, the ego develops, ego become encrusted. I, me, and myself, and little ambitions or big ambitions, goals, they collectively come into conflict. Each individual is seeking the freedom. And one's freedom ends where the other's freedom begins. And we are unable to synchronize our collective freedom, where each individual can live freely without harming others. Here, the only true freedom, this is the secret of the Gita, the spiritual truth. The only true freedom possible to man, this spiritual freedom, establishing oneself in that being that transcends nature, oversteps nature. It is the ground of equality and oneness. This is also the only true freedom possible to man, a freedom which he cannot have unless he outgrows his mental separativeness and becomes the conscious soul in nature. There is a mental separativeness. Our mind is a categorizer. It sees the world as separate things. It is counting even the stars, the number of stars in the galaxy, number of atoms, weight of an atom, weight of a molecule, the forces that are binding them. It is counting and measuring and trying to map out and put pieces together to get the big picture. That's the nature of the mind. It is always scratching the surface. On the other hand, there is a conscious soul in nature behind the mind. Deep within us, there is conscious soul in nature. One of the fundamental attributes of the soul in nature is that it knows that it is part of that universal being, the cosmic being, the transcendent being, the divine being. Only soul knows that. And it is from that knowing, it has this deep sense of oneness with life that is around, all life that is around, all beings that is around, all things that are around. So our true freedom can be arrived only when we go beyond the surface personality of the mental separative ego into the soul in nature. So this is also the only true freedom possible to man, a freedom which he cannot have unless he outgrows his mental separativeness and becomes the conscious soul in nature. The only free will in the world is the one divine will, of which nature is the executrix. There is the divine self, our true self, transcending entire nature, formless, eternal, timeless being, free. That being has its creative movement, the divine Shakti flowing out, manifesting. And nature is the creatrix, the executrix, the executive agency is nature, whereas this divine being and the Shakti of the divine being stands behind. Nature becomes the executive agency. And nature creates individuals in nature, forges out individuals. Eventually, that individual can become conscious. Formation of an individualized ego is an immense work of nature over millions of years, an ego that is self-aware. Then comes the dismantling and dissolving of that ego and the grip of the desire, which nature plants in all creatures so that nature can work through them all. Then this individual, when the desire is renounced, the ego is dissolved, and you recognize the conscious soul in nature, the divine presence in nature, who is upholding her movements. There you will discover the true will, the true free will. It is the divine will that is acting through nature, who is the executrix. So the only free will in the world is the one divine will, of which nature is the executrix. For she is the master and creator of all other wills. There is one divine will that is projecting itself into time and space, and through nature as a means, as an executrix operating. And nature creates all other wills, all the subordinate wills in the multiplicity. Like in physics, we see that scientists are trying to find the one force from which all the fundamental forces of nature, the four forces of nature, emerged. And each force we can see branches out into sub-specializations. So there is one, from a spiritual point of view, there is one divine will that uses nature as an executrix, executive agency. And nature creates a multiplicity of wills, multiplicity of desire movements, mind movements, bodily material movements, all that nature creates. Human free will can be real in a sense, but like all things that belong to the modes of nature, it is only relatively real. So there is certain reality to the human free will, but it is only a relative reality within the framework of the modes of nature. Human will can be real in a sense, but like all things that belong to the modes of nature, it is only relatively real. The mind rides on a swirl of natural forces. Mind is riding, like surfing on the waves of nature. Like on the ocean of nature, there are these waves rising and falling. And mind is riding on the swirls of nature. Balances on a poise between several possibilities. Because the human mind can always see various possibilities, whether I should ride in this way, left, right, center, which direction should I go, all these various possibilities. It can balance between all of them. Balances on a poise between several possibilities. Inclines to one side or other or another. Settles and has the sense of choosing. But it does not see, it is not even dimly aware of the force behind that has determined its choice. That's the most interesting part. Individual has this illusion that I'm choosing. It's like even in our marketplace, when we go for shopping, when we buy a Coca-Cola, or a particular cloth. You deeply believe that you made that choice to buy this Coca-Cola and drink. But behind it, there was entire marketing agency of Coca-Cola company and the entire management behind it who is selling this product and making its money. And it knows if this is the way I do marketing and sales, I'm going to generate this much money and so many millions and billions of people are going to buy. And you're mobilized to buy. And you believe that you made a free choice. Same thing extended to the larger nature. Larger nature is giving that sense of freedom to the individual mind that is riding on the swirls and waves of nature, where it chooses, can I go this direction, that direction, balances between all these possibilities and settles in a particular choice and believe that I made the choice. But it is nature. It does not see, it does not even dimly aware of the force behind that has determined its choice. It cannot see it because that force is something total and to our eyes indeterminate. This force is something total. It is simultaneously acting in the entire creation, the entire cosmos. It's one force acting behind all things. Because it is, for our perception, our eyes, we are not able to see it. It is indeterminate from our tiny little human perspective. All that we see is the finite movements of this or that. We cannot see the one single force moving all things simultaneously. Omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient force. We have no access to it. It cannot see it. It here is the human mind. It cannot see it because that force is something total and to our eyes indeterminate. At most, mind can only distinguish with an approach to clarity and precision. Some out of the complex variety of particular determinations by which this force works out her incalculable purpose. So there is an incalculable purpose. Our entire scientific investigation is based on calculation, counting and calculating, measuring and calculating. Whereas this universal nature, she has an incalculable purpose. It's beyond calculation. There is a larger vision of the spirit from where the creative impulsion is arising and flowing through the nature of which we are not aware. What we are aware is a particular movement. Here is the moon going around. Here is the earth going around. I can measure it. I can map it. Even I can determine where the moon will be some days down the line. At a very material, structural level, we are very successful in measuring all that. The most outer crust of nature. And we can measure all the way even to the molecules, atoms, weigh them. But deep beyond that is the whole science of complexity, where psychology come into the picture, the interior come into the picture, the subjectivity come into the picture, which is not so measurable. Love, when you reduce it into a molecule, you're converting that which is immeasurable into a tiny measurable chemical. That is what we do. At most, mind can only distinguish with an approach to clarity and precision some out of the complex variety of a particular determinations. What are the particular determinations? We see that our whole human brain, human body, human biology, it's a determination of nature. Nature has defined it. Nature has created, it's a particular determination with a habitual operation. And this we can measure. This we can calculate. It's a particular determination of nature. Out of her infinity, we pick up one and we dive deep into it, measuring, mapping, sculpting, scratching the surface. But behind all that, these are all instrumental means the nature uses. But behind all this, there is this force working out her incalculable purpose, the conscious force behind all this, who is simultaneously present behind all the billions of people, all the billions of creatures, all the trillions and trillions of things in creation. It is that one force acting through all. And what we do is we take up a particular determination, measure it, map it, and try to understand the whole by understanding a finite little thing. So at most, mind can only distinguish with an approach to clarity and precision some out of the complex variety of particular determinations by which this force works out her incalculable purpose. There is a purpose in nature. That purpose is the purpose willed by the divine consciousness. Partial itself, the mind rides on a part of the machine. Partial itself. Mind is partial. It is a tiny little window. We know that out of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, our eyes can recognize only a tiny bandwidth of light. The same way our auditory range is a tiny bandwidth. There's a wider spectrum of sounds, wider spectrum of light. And our mind uses our sense organs to access sensorial reality. And it's partial. It is a narrow, limited grasp over the infinity. Partial itself, the mind rides on a part of the machine. The mind is riding on a part of the machine. There is a machinery of nature. The material nature appears to be a machine, and that is measurable. And that is what our physicists are doing, successfully measuring to the minutest detail the machinery of nature. And we are now measuring from where did the mind emerge? The mind that is measuring the machine, which is involved in the machine. Mind rides on a part of the machine, unaware of 9/10 of its motor agencies in time and environment. 9/10. Practically 90% of the motor agencies that is animating our thought, our perception, our action, we are unaware. The mind is not aware. And these motor agencies are in time and environment. There is this vast unfolding of time and space in which this tiny little individual exists. And within that individual, the mind is waking up, something very partial. It is riding on the machine and measuring the machine itself upon which it is riding. Unaware of its past preparation and future drift. And mind struggles to map the past, trying to understand the history of our human evolution, all the way to the Big Bang theories, and we come up with theories of the entire evolution. Rise and fall of civilizations, the Egyptian civilization, the Roman civilization, the Greek civilization, the Chinese, the Indians, the Mesopotamians, the rise and fall of the civilizations. We try to map and understand the history of ancient trade, routes, all that. And it is also trying to understand what is the future drift, where are we going? Looking at the technological development with all the artificial intelligence and rocketry that is going to the other planets, trying to understand life on other galaxies, other solar systems. So there is This mind that has woken up, which is riding the machine, it has woken up within the machine, and it is unaware of the 90% of its own motor agencies and unaware of its past preparation and future drift, and it is trying to map it. But because it rides, it thinks that it is directing the machine. Because it is riding, the thought is unfolding. A thought is unfolding within us. And I do believe that it is my thought. I am directing this thought, but it is part of the machine. And I do start believing that I am directing the machine, which is a fantastic illusion. Partial itself, the mind rides on a part of the machine, unaware of 9/10 of its motor agencies in time and environment, unaware of its past preparation and future drift. But because it rides, it thinks that it is directing the machine. In a sense, it counts for that clear inclination of the mind which we call our will, that firm settling of the inclination, that which presents itself to us as a deliberate choice, is one of nature's most powerful determinants, but it is never independent and sole. It is actually nature's powerful choice. It determines. It has created the whole machinery of the brain in which it has allowed this mind can find expression through this particular machinery and its nervous system. Nature has determined it, allowed it. And within that, mind wakes up and it chooses this or that. It inclines towards a particular option. There are so many different options of philosophies. There is a capitalist version of how a society should run. There is a communist version of how a society has to run. And it can choose which way it should go, which philosophy it should follow, which story it should follow. And it inclines this way or that way. And it believes that it has made that choice. But nature has already created the mold in which it is operating. In a sense, it counts, this sense of free will. In a sense, it counts for that clear inclination, of the mind, which we call our free will, that firm settling of the inclination, which presents itself to us as a deliberate choice, is one of nature's most powerful determinants, but it is never independent and sole. Nature gives that wide canvas. You play within this canvas, but it is never independent and sole. It is operating within the larger framework of nature. Behind this petty instrumental action of the human will, there is something vast and powerful and eternal that oversees the trend of the inclination and presses on the turn of the will. There is a overseeing power behind the tiny little instrumental will of human nature. There is something that oversees the larger movements and allows certain inclination and presses on certain will. Behind this petty instrumental action of the human will, there is something vast and powerful and eternal. It is eternal will. It is powerful, omniscient, omnipresent will that is behind all things, that oversees the trend of the inclination, whether it is inclination of a particular individual who is a change maker in the society, or the followers who choose to follow that particular individual. The whole determinism is given by that larger force that oversees the entire movement. Even what appears to be a revolution in a society led by few leaders both the leaders and the led, and that which is opposed by the leaders and the led, and the conflict between various groups within the society, one overpowering the other to establish something new. All these are determined by the vaster will behind, that oversees the trend of inclination and presses on the turn of the will. Nature allows, nature executes through the individuals. In fact, both sides of any conflict is the vaster nature working herself out. And she has already decided which side will win, who are the agency through which she will work. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, we see Sri Krishna telling Arjuna, people who are already slain, victory is already accomplished. You are only an instrumental nature through which I am executing this nimitta matrena. The choice of which side will win, which revolution will succeed, where things will go, which society will rise, which society will fall, all these are part of a larger nature's workings. But as individual leaders of that change, we do not realize it. We believe that I made the choice. That's wonderful. It gives inspiration. But if we open to the vision of the larger will, we come to greater freedom. There is a total truth in nature greater than our individual choice. It's a powerful line here. There is a total truth, capital T. There is a total truth in nature greater than our individual choice. Total truth. If you look at an ecosystem in which a tiger is hunting an animal and killing an animal, at an individual level, there is a hunter and the hunted. But at an ecosystem level, there is a whole balancing itself. The whole thing evolves together as a food chain. There is a total truth in nature greater than the individual choice. And in this total truth, or even beyond and behind it, there is something that determines all result. Its presence and secret knowledge keep up steadily in the process of nature, a dynamic, almost automatic perception of the right relations, the varying or persistent necessities, the inevitable steps of the movement. There is a determination coming from a deeper, vaster source, seen from that total truth. There is something that determines all results. Its presence and secret knowledge keep up steadily in the processes of nature, a dynamic, almost automatic perception. Now, when it comes to the words like perception, we conceive it to be our individual personal perception. But for this larger being, larger consciousness, the larger truth, it is looking at reality from millions of eyes, millions of perception, millions of windows of perception. There is a automatic perception that is driven by the larger truth and that which is beyond it. It is operating through and it is holding its steady will, pushing the instruments in certain direction of the right relation, and it establishes the right relations, the varying or persistent necessities, the inevitable steps of the movement. Movement, social movement, collective movements, when the movement and trajectory of the development of science and technology on Earth in the last 300, 400 years, we may think that it is individual scientists who discovered it, or individual poets, philosophers who created those visions. No, it is the greater self behind all. There is a total truth that uses people as instruments and unfolds step by step the processes, reveals, creates necessities, builds relationships, and lifts up a society or bring down a society. There is a greater will, a greater presence, a greater force. There is a sacred divine will, eternal and infinite, omniscient and omnipotent, that expresses itself in the universality. And in each particular of all these apparently temporal and finite, inconscient or half conscient things. Inconscient thing. A stone is inconscient. That is moved by a secret divine will that transcends the creation, presides over it, and it acts through its universal will also, the transcendent, universal, and the individual. It's simultaneously operating through all of them. It's infinite, omniscient, omnipotent. It is operating in the inconscient, half conscient. A plant is half conscient. An animal is a bit more conscious. A human being can become a lot more self-conscious. Even in the human being, as we have already explored, there is the sense of free choice. But it is the divine will, secret, omniscient, omnipotent, that is guiding. It is infinite power. There is a secret divine will, eternal and infinite, omniscient and omnipotent, that expresses itself in the universality. It is operating in the universality and in each particular of all these apparently temporal and finite, inconscient or half-conscient things. So it's simultaneously acting from transcendent to the universal to the individual, all the way down to the most inconscient stone, to the particle, to the finest atoms. This is the power or presence. Both are written with capital P. This is the power or presence meant by the Gita when it speaks of the Lord within the heart of all existences, who turns all creatures as if mounted on a machine by the illusion of nature. So this power or presence, this divine will, presides over all things, who turns all creatures as if mounted on a machine, yantra rupena. That is the phrase in the Gita, yantra rupena, like a machine, mounted on a machine by the illusion of nature. Illusion from a human cognitive perspective. Human vision is limited and narrow. Appearances. So this is the power or presence meant by the Gita when it speaks of the Lord who is presiding over all things. Lord within the heart of all existences. Within our own heart, in the deepest depth, this supreme power is residing. It is the inhabitant and the one who defines, determines. There is a Lord within, the true self within. As we go deep into it, it will also reveal itself not only within this individual, particular individual, it liberates and opens into the universality of the self and transcendent nature of that self. It is at once individual, universal, and transcendent. This is the power or presence meant by the Gita when it speaks of the Lord within the heart of all existences, who turns all creatures as if mounted on a machine by the illusion of nature. This divine will is not an alien power or presence. Alien. These days we see so many people talking about the aliens, something that is out there. And the most powerful secret is hidden deep within us. It is not an alien power. An omniscient, omnipotent power is secretly dwelling deep within us, the true self. This divine will is not an alien power or presence. It is intimate to us. Intimate to us. And we ourselves are part of it, for it is our own highest self that possesses and supports it. It's our own highest self. It possesses this instrumentation and supports it. And it is always supporting. It had been supporting. It is supporting. It will continue to support. It's just that we are not aware. That's the only problem. We just don't remember. We don't know. We are caught up in appearances. And this divine will is not an alien power or presence. It is intimate to us, and we ourselves are part of it, for it is our own highest self that possesses and supports it. Only it is not our conscious mental will. We have a conscious mental will, and the mind is a very tiny, narrow instrumentation. And this is not what it is. Our consciousness is a tiny little window, and this true self is something entirely different. Only it is not our conscious mental will. It rejects often enough what our conscious will accepts, and accepts what our conscious will rejects. And we can see this intervention of the greater will into our life. We want to go in one particular direction. We make a choice. This is what I want. And a greater will intervenes and rejects it. On the other hand, you refuse to go. I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. The outer being makes that choice, and a greater divine will intervenes and pushes you and make you accept that which you rejected, or you want to reject, you don't want to accept. And yet circumstances will be worked out in such a way that the only option given to you is to accept it. So this divine will that is behind has a greater wisdom, and better we recognize that greater wisdom than fighting with it. Because we will find that all our efforts, however smart we are, however hard we try, if the divine will is not there, it will not arrive at fruition. It is not our conscious mental will. It rejects often enough what our conscious will accepts, and accepts what our conscious will rejects. For while this secret one knows all and every whole and each detail, our surface mind knows only a little part of things. That's our problem. Our mind can know only a tiny little fragment. Even in any given moment, if you concentrate, you can notice that our attention can grasp only a tiny portion of what is happening. No amount of mindfulness will give us the totality. We will immediately see that only that which I paid attention to has been registered. Everything else is beyond our cognitive range. Memory. It's not registered. The surface mind in particular. It picks up a tiny little detail here and there. The more you see how small the window of the mind is, of the attention span is, we realize we live on the surface, seeing so little. While the secret one knows all, and every whole and each detail, our surface mind knows only a little part of things. Our will is conscious in the mind. And what it knows by the thought only, our human individual will. And Sri Aurobindo is repeatedly bringing the will dimension because he is currently covering the yoga of divine works, of which the will is the faculty. And our human individual will has to unite with the divine will. That is the idea of karma yoga. Our individual will uniting with the divine will. But our individual will is the will of our surface mind, and it knows itself only through thought. Our will is conscious in the mind, and what it knows by the thought only. The divine will is super conscious to us. It is beyond our range. Because it is in its essence supramental, and it knows all because it is all. It is supramental, means it's beyond the range of the mind. It is something else. It is able to know everything because it is everything. We are not able to know everything because we are not everything. We are bound in our tiny little window. I, me, and myself, and my little experience, little memory, which I associate to be me. Our will is conscious in the mind, and what it knows by the thought only. The divine will is super conscious to us because it is in its essence supramental, and it knows all because it is all. Our highest self, which possesses and supports this universal power, is not our ego self, not our personal nature. It is something transcendent and universal. It transcends this entire creation. It stands beyond it. Also, it is universal. It is involved in all things, supports all things. It is simultaneously transcendent and universal. Whereas what we are experiencing as ourselves is a tiny little surface ego self. So this true self is not our personal nature. It is something transcendent and universal, of which these smaller things are only form and flowing surface. It is just the surface. Like a vast ocean has its surface waves. We are those tiny little surface wave that is mistaking itself to be a separate individual and believe that I am the one who is moving the wave. I am the one who is riding. Our highest self, which possesses and supports this universal power. So this great self possesses and supports this universal power. The power is that universal will that is sustaining, supporting, and moving everything. Possesses and supports this universal power is not our ego self, not our personal nature. It is something transcendent and universal, of which these smaller things are only form and flowing surface. It's a flowing surface. It's not a fixed little thing. It's flowing. If we surrender our conscious will and allow it to be made one with the will of the eternal, now here comes the core of that yoking. Yoga means to yoke, to unite. What are we uniting through Karma Yoga? It is this. If we surrender our conscious will and allow it to be made one with the will of the eternal, our individual conscious will getting yoked onto the eternal will by surrendering to the eternal will, then and then only shall we attain to a true freedom. That's a paradox. It is through surrender we discover the immense freedom. And it is not our individual freedom, it is truly the freedom of the true self. Freedom of the infinity finds its flowing delight into this tiny little instrument which has surrendered to it. Living in the divine liberty, we shall no longer cling to this shackled, so-called free will. Shackled. Our free will is very, very narrow and limited and shackled. We will not bind ourselves to it. A puppet of freedom, ignorant, illusory, relative, bound to error of its own inadequate vital motives and mental figures. Vital motives and mental figures. We are mental beings who create our mental figures. What is right, what is wrong, what I should accomplish. These are all our mental aims. And behind it, there is vital motives, my desires, my impulses, my drives. And we are bound by all that. When we are able to step out of all that into the greater divine will, our conscious will is surrendered to the greater divine will, then we experience the true freedom, true creative freedom, true creative power, which is flowing in from the greater will. So if we surrender our conscious will and allow it to be made one with the will of the eternal, then and then only shall we attain to a true freedom, liberation. It's a creative freedom. Living in the divine liberty. It's a divine liberty. We can live in that. We shall no longer cling to this shackled so-called free will, which is a puppet of freedom, ignorant, illusory, relative, bound to the error of its own inadequate vital motives and mental figures. So this small surface personality, this little persona on the surface of this little ego, when we are able to renounce the ego, renounce the desire, and surrender to the divine will, then that will establish the equality within us. And through that equality, we enter into oneness with all. And we can experience a dynamic oneness with the entire creation and realize our absolute liberty through action in the world, and all the energies of nature can flow through us, and greatest action will become possible through this human vehicle. That's the greatness of human being, who can become conscious and open to the divine will. An animal is not conscious, and there is a very, very limited creative possibility through an animal. Even if an animal is perfectly surrendered to the divine, what divine can do through an animal is very, very limited. Whereas a human being endowed with the conscious intelligence, creativity can explode, and divine can become far more expressive through this individual human being who is infinitely more capable. And that capacity and the possibility enlarge and expand, and the divine human being can take birth. Because this tiny little individual is learning to open to the divinity that is beyond the individual. And that divinity pours in, and its will act through this tiny little mold and work out its purpose in the nature, in the earth, on earth. And our evolutionary progression will be accelerated by that divine will, of which we become instrumental condition, or instruments, who can experience that a conscious surrender to become a willing servitor of the divine consciousness. Aurobindo Charter says, Aurobindo will be a place of that unending education, youth that never ages, who become this willing servitor of the divine consciousness. Through that, we move towards human unity. And human unity is possible when we open to the equality and oneness through union with the divine consciousness. That's the promise. That is what yoga brings. That is what karma yoga brings. That's the greatest teaching of the Gita. So with that, we are coming to the end of this episode. Please do subscribe and click on the bell icon so that you can get notification when the next episode is released. Please do share your insights, your journey, whatsoever it is, your questions, whatsoever it is. That will be lovely. See you next week.